Okay, let's do the first thing and check to make sure you can hear me. Can you hear me okay? I got a behind me. Okay, good morning, everybody. I apologize for the delay, but that's how living in the 21st century operates, right? If somebody could give me a thumbs up, just so I know you can hear me okay. Okay, it sounds like we have feedback. How's that? Okay, awesome. All right, let's go. So, uh, good morning from Minnesota, where I think it's one of the coldest days of the year. But I did bring a friend with me. If you've seen any of the videos lately, this strawberry plant right here, this has been growing in the basement under lights. And we actually have some flowers on there. So even though it's crazy cold here in Minnesota, uh, if you ever get set up or decide to grow plants inside, oh, there's a couple petals that fell off. You can actually do something like this in the middle of winter here in Minnesota or wherever you're at. So that's our mascot for today's broadcast. And I've had that in a couple YouTube videos so far. So you'll see that it's grown a little bit since the last couple of videos I had it in. But anyway, I appreciate you joining me here today. I don't want to preach. I want to give you a little bit background on me, on Meg's Edible Landscapes, kind of hear where you guys are at, and really to meet your needs wherever you're at as far as growing food. That's why we're here, to grow food and enjoy the fruits of our labor, so to speak. So I want to give you a brief background on me and Meg's Edible Landscapes in case we've never met before and you're new to Meg. I started Meg's Edible Landscapes in 2020, right after the great toilet paper crisis. So I know that probably brings back a little PTSD for some of us. But shortly after the toilet paper crisis, there was a run on vegetable seeds and basically anything that you could buy to grow food. So I saw it with the plant nurseries that do perennials like apple trees, raspberries. I was actually trying to get my hands on some raspberry plants because we had just moved from Dundas, Northfield area out to Denison, 15 minutes away onto an acreage. But that was I didn't know at the time that was a horrible year to try to start transplanting fruiting plants just because we had a run on basically anything people could get their hands on. So, having said that, in the past February to no later than the beginning of March is when I would typically order seeds or anything that would grow for that growing season. But 2020 kind of changed that all. And if you've tried to get seeds for a vegetable garden or even maybe like apple trees or some type of starts, you've probably noticed a big change. So a lot of stuff has changed in that it's not as easy to get supply of seeds anymore. And it's just what it is. I used to have 2 or 3 seed vendors that I'd buy for Meg, and now I usually typically I expect it this year too because I'm going to be ordering seeds this week, and that's why I want to do this live stream. Is I have about 6 or 7 seed companies that I get my seeds from. It's just it's just the nature of the world today in 2026. So if you're totally new to gardening, could you please put a little comment in the chat just so I can kind of know who you are, or more of your background. That's what I'd like to get to, so I could see who's joining with us today. I'm gonna try not to make this long-winded. I value time, so I'm gonna have very pertinent information for you for the growing season. And like I said, I haven't ordered seeds yet. I'm gonna be doing that this weekend, but I wanted to show you some of the process of what I use when I'm ordering for the growing season. So, Meg's Edible Landscapes started in 2020 after the toilet paper crisis, like I said, and that was it's something I was always thinking about. I was in school at the time working a horticulture degree at Oregon State University. I chose that university because it was the only university I could find at the time that allowed me to work on a horticulture uh, degree online while I still had a full-time day job. And I have a family too, so I am very limited on time. So everything I am going to tell you today in this live stream and then upcoming live streams, it's through the lens of somebody who has a full-time job, because I still have a full-time day job. Meg is a seasonal business for me. A full-time day job, a family stuff. I'm sure a lot of you probably can relate with if you got kids in sports or athletics. Dance for us is a big thing. And then trying to grow food on top of that. And if you have gardening experience, you know that if you're not staying on top of the garden, or however you're gardening, whether that be in containers, raised beds, or in ground, that it can get away from you very quickly. And here in Minnesota, in Zone 4B, we've had some crazy extreme weather the last few years, in that we can go from frost warnings in beginning of May before Mother's Day to all of a sudden 90 degrees at the end of May. So uh, Minnesota is cool in that we get 4 defined seasons, but they tend to be extreme seasons, and that's kind of what we've seen over the last 3 years especially. So what I try to do with Meg, and when I'm setting up the CSAs and the garden for the year, is I also view it through the lens of, I just expect crazy temperature swings, humidity swings. Last year was a very wet year here in Minnesota, and I think it was the first year our grass here on the acreage didn't dry out, which was pretty wild, because usually about August, I'm happy because we don't have to mow the grass as much. It just goes kind of dormant, and then it sleeps until the next spring. But last year we had a pretty wet summer. It was great for growing a vegetable garden, so I didn't have to worry about watering stuff outside. But yeah, it's definitely a different year. And this is a new growing season, so I expect to have more wild stuff as we get going. So thank you for everybody that's written in here as far as your background. Looks like we have some pretty new gardeners. Good. So, yep, 10 garden beds. That's fantastic. Started excited. Every year we're cut back because become overwhelmed. Yep, I hear that, Becca. Run out of enthusiasm every Sunday. Yep. Okay, so that's a little bit background on me. I appreciate writing the comments that you guys have written, so I have a pretty good idea of where you're coming from. So now I want to talk a little bit about my growing history. So we moved to Minnesota in 2009 from Sioux City, Iowa. I attempted to grow a garden in Sioux City in 2006, and it lasted for about a month. And then, since I was a complete newbie, I didn't think that I should look at deciduous trees. We had an apple and a pear tree, so I went and direct sowed. I had corn, beans. I think I had a couple lettuce varieties, and they germinated, they sprouted, and then about a month later, once the apple tree and pear tree bloomed or leafed out, that was it for the garden. So everything I'm going to share with you is going to be from mostly real life experience or that I've picked up, and my goal is to shorten the learning curve for you. So we learn from pain through experience of our own, or I hope to share the information that I've learned through my own pain so we can get you up to a successful gardening experience without having to repeat some of the same mistakes that I've had. So, okay. So seeds. So today's live stream is going to be about seeds. And if you've grown food before, you're probably going to get something like this. This is the time of the year when the big seed companies, and this is one of the seed companies I use, is Johnny Selected Seeds. This is when they start spamming your mailbox, which is kind of cool because we don't really get a lot of snail mail anymore. But if you have gardened and ordered seed from seed companies in the past, this is when they're going to start sending out the seed catalogs. And my advice is to start looking now if you want to start seeds this year. Because as I mentioned in years past, prior to 2020, you could probably get away with ordering seeds in March here from Minnesota. Because the reality is we're not going to be direct sowing or starting seeds until mid to late March anyway. Here at the nursery, I'm not going to be starting any seeds until next month. So to give you an idea, we're a commercial nursery here. We're actually not going to be starting anything until typically mid to end of February. So that gives you the idea of Zone 4B, especially here in Minnesota. The start of the growing season for seed starting is the end of February. And then typically how it works is we start off slow, kind of like the Army used to teach a crawl, walk, run. So that's kind of how I feel when we're starting the gardening season. Is we start really slow in February, and then it just builds up steam. Once we get to about May, when we're past the frost-free days, that's usually when it's a full-on sprint, because all we're doing is transplanting into our final growing spots for the plants, and then it doesn't let up until typically July 4th. So if you're brand new to growing, that's kind of a rhythm that you can expect is, and especially it might even get faster when we get into May, June, because if we have wild temperature swings where we start off mild days in, let's say May, 50s, 60s for high, it might get up to 90 by the time we're at the end of May. So that's just something you kind of have to plan for. I don't know if we're going to have that extreme of a temperature swing this year, but at the very least, you can expect that once we get to May, it's just full on. We got to get plants from the seedling trays into the ground or the containers as fast as possible so they can get acclimated to their new home outside. And in future weekends, I'm going to be talking more about the theory of what we do. So I won't give you a whole bunch of information today about how we transplant and what all goes into keeping plants alive from when they start in the seedling trays to the time they get transplanted out. We'll cover that later, but I at least want to give some background on how that rhythm works through the spring. Okay, it looks like started everything from seed last year except for my tomatoes. Most of my herbs didn't make it. Katie, what type of herbs were you starting last year, just out of curiosity? Snap peas did well, that's good. Cucumbers started to produce food, but none survives. Okay, all right, thank you for that. Okay, so let's get into a few different types of growing methods. And then I'm going to hit hard on what we do here at Makes Edible Landscapes for a bunch of reasons. But 3 traditional ways of growing, and it sounds like some of you have garden beds, so that's awesome. We have containers, and Makes Edible Landscapes is exclusively in containers right now because I built a business on setting up instant gardens. So we have customers in the Northfield, Faribault, Lakeville area where we actually set up, I call it an instant garden. They're all containers and grow bags. I love grow bags. I started messing around with those before 2020, but I fell in love with them because they're inexpensive, they're lightweight, so they're easy to move, and I can set up a 12 to 24 square foot garden in about 20 minutes. I've gotten that down to about 20 minutes, including an irrigation system, which in future live streams, You're going to hear this now, but you're going to hear this again as a repeated method of the biggest help that you can do to yourself or thank your future self is to automate the watering, because that goes hand in hand with the extreme temperatures we have here in Minnesota. Even though we're crazy far north in the lower 48 United States, or the vegetable garden, however you're growing, especially in containers, it has to have supplemental water. Uh, we just have some stretches where it's just too long and the plants are going to suffer. And that was one of the things that I learned very early on in my growing career was I severely underestimated how much water vegetable plants need. And a rule of thumb I can give you right now is the bigger the plant or the bigger the fruit. So like cucumbers, I saw that as one of the plants you guys were growing. Uh, Watermelon, pumpkin, squash, anything with large fruits. Basically, the larger the surface area of the leaf, the larger the fruit, the more water that plant is going to demand. If it doesn't get it, it may not die, but it's going to be very upset. So we'll go and probably 2 months from now, I'll be talking about automating water, but it's just something to squirrel away in your brain right now, just to think like, okay, I should probably think about this. And we don't have to get extravagant with the automated watering. It could be as simple as if you have a container garden, like we have grow bags, you can simply have a tray underneath it that you can add water to it, and the plants will soak up the water over a week. And that shortens your time from watering every day to watering once a week. And that's how we do it here with our CSA gardens is we have a flooded tray method. The plants get water for a week as much as they need, and then they're just it's all automated. You don't even think about it. You can go on with your life and the plants take care of themselves. So that's that. So back to the seeds or the growing methods. We have container gardens, we have raised beds, and raised beds are awesome if you don't have soil. So at our last house, if you do live in the Northfield Dundas area or any new construction area, odds are you don't have topsoil. And I think it should be illegal in my opinion. But what tends to happen is the contractors will come in, they'll scrape off the topsoil to get down to the subsoil to put your basement in or your foundation. And then they'll politely not put the topsoil back. So the last house that we were at was a new construction in 2011, and we didn't have any topsoil. And I didn't know, I was still green, trying to figure stuff out. So I planted fruiting trees, and they did survive. But as far as vegetable plants, you can't grow vegetables. You can't grow tomatoes in clay. It doesn't work. So what I had to do is I had to go vertical with raised beds. And when we moved from that house to the country, I think I had 16 4x8 foot beds that were a foot deep, and that was a lot of work to truck that in and basically replace what was already there on the property. So raised beds, and then in ground. So if you are blessed with in ground soil, congratulations. And you truly are blessed if you got the topsoil with the nutrients. The only thing I'll say with that is the best thing you can do is continue to add compost. It'll put nutrients back into the soil. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. But again, if you do have topsoil on your property that you're growing a traditional in-ground garden, yeah, you're blessed. So those are the three traditional types of growing methods. There's other fancy stuff like hydroponics and aquaponics, which is we're not even going to talk about that. But I wanted to highlight the three different growing methods because whichever method you choose, that's something you need to think about when you order seeds or what you want to put in that space. And there's pros and cons in each. I'm going to go briefly over that. We'll start with the in-ground. Back to Minnesota weather or the crazy temperature swings, you may have experienced this already. But if we get to Mother's Day, so Mother's Day this year, and you transplant your cucumber, or when you wouldn't have cucumbers yet, but tomatoes and peppers, get those in the garden, and then we have a late frost or a late frost warning, and that happens. So now you're going to have to scramble to cover up your plants because I don't expect it, and you wouldn't want to rip them out of the ground again. But that's the downside to growing in the ground, is that once you transplant your plants out and they get settled, they might have a rude shock if we all of a sudden have a late frost. The other thing too with in-ground, just to keep in mind, is if you haven't done a soil test, I'll put these in the notes after the live stream today. But and especially if you're here in Minnesota, the University of Minnesota through the Extension Service has a garden soil testing service. It's relatively inexpensive, and I just checked this morning. They raised their prices a little bit, but it's not too bad. So for a soil sample, regular soil sample, where they check the phosphorus, potassium, pH, organic matter, it's $22 a sample. So that is relatively inexpensive to get a baseline reading of your topsoil or where you plan on putting a garden. pH is a big thing. We're not going to talk much about that, but that is something that comes into play with growing food. So if you haven't had your soil tested, University of Minnesota Extension Service has a service to test your soil for you, and then they take all the guesswork out. They'll give you a report of your soil sample you send into them, and they'll ask you too before you send it if this is for home gardening, and then they will tailor the information they give to you for that setup for home gardening, which is it's very cool. I've used it in the past, and it was great information. So if you don't live in Minnesota, but you live in one of the other states, each state has a land grant university, and they should have a soil testing service. So it's a very convenient way of getting a baseline measurement on wherever your soil is that you're going to do a garden. And it's best to do it beforehand and not plant into something that you find out afterhand that there's a serious problem with the soil here. So that's why I'm trying to help you out, is avoid future headaches or frustration if you go through all the work of setting up in-ground plot and then find out afterhand that we have a problem here. We have very tough soil to work with. So that's in-ground. Raised beds, similar issues to in-ground. But the cool thing about raised beds is if you built them, then you know what soil's going in there. You could still have your soil tested, but usually when you order topsoil or compost, and as a side note, if you live in the Northfield Dundas area, if you don't know about this, and every year at the farmers market, I tell new growers or new people to Northfield that where Multi-Mill or it's Post now, if you go to the park behind that, there's a community compost facility. It's free compost. You just have to bring a shovel, and it costs sweat equity. So if you have a pickup truck or some big containers, you can shovel as much compost as you want, and that's a huge blessing in the Northfield Dundas area, is that resource there. So if you also have deciduous trees that like to drop leaves in the fall, you can take them there and drop them off, and then it's just it's a closed loop circle. So they manage the compost actively. You'll see windrows out there where they're turning that material. But yep, thank you, Katie. Yep, you got it. Not everybody knows about that, especially people that are new to the Northfield Dundas area. So it's a huge resource. And I have checked throughout the state of Minnesota, and there's many public composting facilities that have that resource too. So if you don't have your own compost pile at home, by all means, please Google composting facility by me in Minnesota, and you'll have one that's within a relatively short distance to you. So raised beds, you still have the same issues where if you transplant into that bed and then we have a late frost or something with the weather, you're going to have to plan for alibis, or how do we mitigate? How do we keep the plants alive without frost or heat or hail or something crazy, wind, something going on? So that's raised beds. Now we're going to go to where my heart lies, and my favorite subject is containers. Is anybody here growing in containers already? Drop that in notes. I'm curious. So, like I had mentioned, I started with grow bags because I saw that this could be something I could actually help a lot of people with in a relatively short amount of time. They're inexpensive, and the win for Minnesota with our extreme weather is if we have a late frost. I tell people at the Northfield Riverwalk Market, like every year, it's great because I say if you want the time hack, if you have a garage that's facing east, and we have a late frost, put your grow bags or your containers inside your garage, and then open the garage in the morning and then shut it at night. That's what I did for years, because we had those yo-yos where the weather would warm up and then we'd get close to frost. And as a side note on that, I don't trust the weather apps. They're a great tool to have for planning, but I got burned one year. It took 1 year to learn that if the temperature that's forecast is below 40 degrees Fahrenheit, if I have any warm plants like peppers, tomatoes, those aren't going outside. They're coming back inside. And if they're in containers, it's easy to do. I can just simply pick up a 20-pound grow bag and move it inside a warm garage for a night. But I had 1 year where it was forecasted 38 degrees, and I went downstairs to make coffee on a Saturday morning and open up the curtains, and my heart dropped because all my pepper and tomato transplants were outside. They looked beautiful. They had a nice frost gleam to them, but they were all done. I lost everything, and that was a very, very hard learning curve. After that year, I never trusted the weather app again. And my baseline is 40 degrees. If it's below that, any frost sensitive plants, they're staying inside for the night. And it doesn't matter if they're small transplants or if they're already transplanted into their final grow bag or container, they're coming in. Or if I'm at the point now with the nursery where I can't move 500 bags. So I have other ways of doing that, and I use frost blankets. So that's probably, if you've already experienced growing in ground or raised beds, you've probably used frost blankets. If you haven't, they're relatively expensive. I get mine also from Johnny's in the big rolls, and then I cut them to length as I need them. Oh, grow bags. Yeah, the question about grow bags. What are grow bags? This right here, this is a grow bag. So this is that strawberry plant I was telling you about. That's a grow bag. This is a 1 gallon grow bag, and I go as small as quarter gallon. All my single strawberry plants go in here in the 1 gallons, and then I get as big as 10 gallons for our CSA instant gardens. Those end up being about 40 pounds. If I go much bigger than that grow bag, and I do have garlic in grow bags, but they're in 50-gallon grow bags. Those grow bags are too heavy to move, so those sit in place. Okay, so yeah, that's to answer your question. This is what a grow bag looks like, and I was saying these grow bags are relatively expensive. This bag alone, I think, is 50 cents for this one. So compared to any other type of like a terracotta, or I don't know, even plastic pots, these are probably the least expensive options for container growing. And the best part too with grow bags is they're easy to clean. So a lot of the grow bag companies, they advertise it or market it as you can like machine wash grow bags. I don't do that. I have a different method because I'm sanitizing hundreds, over 1,000 grow bags every year. So I have my own method of doing that, but they're really easy to clean. Or if you have something like this, like a strawberry, or you can overwinter tomatoes and peppers too. These are easy to move inside at the end of the year. Okay, back to containers and grow bags. So something with seeds is once you plant in a raised bed or in ground, that plant is now there until it finishes its life cycle. So you have to keep that in mind when you're selecting seeds, because if you get seeds that are, let's say, a tomato plant, we'll briefly go over this. If you're not familiar with this, we have different types of tomato plants, and this applies to other seeds too. So beans would be a good example, where you have determinate and indeterminate variety seeds. So determinate, you can think of those as sprinter seeds, or at least that's how I think of it, is where that tomato variety is going to germinate, grow, it leaves out, so the vegetative stage, and then it produces flowers, and then it produces fruit from the flowers, and then the plant's done. So that's a determinate. That's typically a bush style. They're shorter. And like I said, it's a sprinter. So it's going to do its whole life cycle in a relatively short time. You're going to get all your fruit in a short window of time. Indeterminate tomatoes, those are tomatoes that you think about as vining tomatoes. So those ones are more of marathon runners. But I'll put a caveat here, because here in Minnesota, any cold season region or cold region, even though it's a marathon runner and it can go for months and months and months, we realistically only have about 120 to 150 frost-free days in Minnesota. So you have to keep that in mind too, because even with a vining tomato, that one will germinate, vegetative stage, it will flower and fruit, and then it repeats the cycle throughout the season. So you won't get as much fruit in one short time. It's kind of staged throughout the season. But you have to keep in mind, once September, October rolls around and we get into the colder days, once that tomato plant gets a frost kill, it's done. It's done. You can use frost blankets and extend its season, but I'll put this caveat in there too that I've learned from growing season is, once we get to September, October, you've probably already noticed that the days are getting shorter, but the sun is actually in a different position in the sky. So you're losing light. So even though that indeterminate tomato plant can grow for months and months and months, here in Minnesota, you'll see it peak and down as we get closer to September and October. So I'm saying all of this because this determines, or this is something I would suggest you think about when you're selecting seeds. If you're in a container, it's not as big of a deal. But if you're in the raised bed or in the ground, if you plant indeterminate tomatoes, then you need to think about what that's going to look like in 4 months from now or late summer. Because that plant might be 10 feet tall or the vine's 10 feet long. And you think about the spacing. We're not going to talk about spacing right now, but that's something that goes into my thought process of what does this plant look like throughout its life cycle. In containers, as long as the container with the soil is big enough for the root system of that plant, I've done both indeterminate and determinate tomato plants with success, because since it's in a container, if it outgrows its location, I could simply move the container and then readjust any trellises. Or I like to use bamboo teepee, so I'll use 3 bamboos stakes, and then I could tie the vines to that. Okay, looks like we have around 60 flower seed packs. We started around 11 flat so far. Good for you. Are any of your flowers edible? Gothic Park. I'm curious to see if you have any edible flowers. I also do edible flowers. A lot of people are unfamiliar with edible flowers, but there's a there's quite a few edible flowers on the market. Some of the popular ones I do are nasturtiums, and then violas, pansies. Sunflowers, of course, are edible, but those are some of the popular ones we do here. Um, anyway, so back to the seeds. So indeterminate, determinate. So you kind of have idea of how those behave differently. And then this also applies to some other different types of plants. So beans, you might see bush or pole beans. That's very similar to the determinate and indeterminate tomatoes, where you have to think about that plant. So a bush bean is going to be a shorter, compact plant that flowers and then produces your pods. And then a pole bean, you're going to have to think about how you're going to trellis or um, how you're going to direct that plant once it starts growing. And some of my favorite plants are for pole beans. It's called a magic beanstalk through Renee's Garden out of California. I'm gonna post this in the notes after the live stream today. Uh, but this one will get to about 12 feet tall, and it has purple and black beans. It's a very cool looking bean after it's produced. Amaranth is edible. Good, good. Yeah, awesome. Um, but yeah, so as far as indeterminate, determinate, that's the thing to know about the behavior of that plant and what to expect once it starts growing. And then that helps you with planning on spacing. Uh, so indeterminate, determinate. And then we have three types of seeds that you'll see in the seed catalogs, like Johnny's here. And you've probably seen these, or if you haven't experienced them, I'm going to talk a little bit about them. You have hybrids, and we're going to start with those because those are the ones that are marketed very heavily every year by the seed companies. And the reason why they're marketed heavily is because those ones bring in the most revenue. So you'll notice too when you start seeing seeds is that some seeds like hybrids, they seem to be, they sometimes can be 2 or 3 or 4 times more expensive than that same variety that's not a hybrid, open pollinated. And a lot of the cost that goes into that seed is for the seed breeder, and that's not bad, but that seed breeder had to do a lot of work to come up with that hybrid. So hybrids, you have open pollinated, and then you have heirlooms. The open pollinated and the heirlooms, uh, those two types of seeds are seeds that you can save, and that's something I would suggest you start thinking about now, because that's something that you can save money on if you can save your seeds. And we won't talk a lot about the seed saving right now because that's a whole subject by itself. But open pollinated and heirlooms, you can definitely save the seeds, and those seeds will produce what's called true to type, which means when you take a seed of, let's say, a lettuce, open pollinated lettuce, and you plant the seed from that plant from that year. So next year, when I plant the daughter seed of the lettuce plant this year, I expect that same plant to come back as it's formed this year. F1 hybrids are different because how that works is, if you remember your high school biology class, I I don't know how your biology course experience was, but you have the Punnett square. You talk about the genetics and how the traits are passed on from the mom and the father. The first generation is we're making the first generation, so the daughter of those two plants. Uh, the genetics are not going to come out 100% the same the next year. So you're going to have a distribution the next year of those seeds, which is not going to look necessarily exactly like the parent. You can definitely save seeds from F1 hybrids, but you're not going to, you're don't expect the same plant that you had this year. You're going to have a distribution of genetics. So I'm not going to get more into that, but that's the big difference between the F1 hybrids, the open pollinated, and the heirloom seeds. I use hybrid seeds here in the plant nursery for a couple of reasons. A lot of work has been done for container gardens, which is another reason why I planted my flag on the container gardens. So a lot of the hybrids I use are specifically bred for containers. And what that means is I usually get the dwarf or the determinate variety tomatoes. So they're small. I get about 2 feet tall on a lot of my tomato varieties. And then they're self-contained, and then I get a flush of that. So what I typically do is with my determinate F1 hybrids, I have a succession. So the tomato plant will I usually get those out into the gardens end of June into July. But by July, they're already producing. And then I'll start dropping tomato plants off as we go throughout the season. If hopefully that makes sense. So I can stage that. So some gardeners will talk about succession planting, and that's exactly what I'm doing, but I'm doing it with containers instead of actually doing it in a raised bed or in ground where that plant finishes and then um, you're planting something behind it. That's the coolest thing with the containers, and what we do here at Makes Edible Landscapes is that I can do succession planting, but I shorten the season to where that plant's done. I already have another tomato plant coming in behind it. Uh, but back to the F1 hybrids, I do use a lot of hybrids because like I said, there's been a lot of work done to produce heavy producing, heavy producing compact plants that actually taste good too. And that's a side note I really want to stress is if you haven't gardened or grown your own food before, the first year that you experience homegrown food, you're going to instantly and immediately realized that all the produce that we buy at the grocery store is lacking. It's lacking something. And a lot of people don't understand or realize that a lot of the produce that we have at the grocery store, unless it's grown locally, those varieties are selected for shelf life and for transportation. And the sacrifice to that is you're going to lose a ton of the flavor. So the first time you have a homegrown tomato, or if you shop at a local farmers markets, you've probably already noticed there's a huge difference in the flavor profile of something locally grown than something that was shipped across the country or from a different part of the world. And that is one of the biggest benefits of growing your own food is you get to experience a flavor profile that you're never going to be able to buy at a grocery store. But back to the hybrids, I do use a lot of hybrids, but I also use a lot of open-pollinated varieties, and I do save seeds. And that's something I expand every year is the type of seeds that I save just to build my library here. And just to kind of rewind back to 2020, if I didn't save seeds prior to 2020, I wouldn't have been able to start Meg because I wouldn't have had anything to start it with. So like I said, right after that toilet paper run, there was a run on vegetable seeds. And so all the big seed companies like Johnny's or High Mowing, that's another company I use. Most of their inventory was gone. And that was a great year for aspiring gardeners. But it's also something to think about is even if you're new in your growing journey, that you can totally save your seeds, and then you're building your little library. So if there is another, God forbid, another pandemic or something crazy like that, you're not solely dependent on seed companies to get your seeds to start this year. You already have a library. And then I'll touch really briefly on the heirlooms. Heirlooms are also open pollinated. But the heirlooms are cool because these have more of a historical context. So when you start looking through seed catalogs, you might see an heirloom, and there might be a little bit story that goes along with it. Maybe this is a seed variety that goes back 150, 200 years. So when you see heirloom, that's usually the context around it is there's some historical significance to this, or maybe you have a family member or maybe grandparents who have been saving seeds or growing seeds out for generations, and they've they've kept this in the family. So that's a very other cool part of heirlooms is growing your own local varieties. If you listen to gardening podcasts or maybe YouTube videos, you might actually hear uh, host talking about losing diversity in seeds. So I'm not going to touch any more on that. Just know that open pollinated and then heirlooms, you can totally save the seeds on that. F1 hybrids, you can save the seeds, but those plants that are grown out from those seeds are not going to be true to type, or they're not going to look like the plant you had this year. So that's the different types of seeds. I have one more thing I wanted to talk about is I have a 90-10 rule, and I don't hear a lot of people talking about this, but this is one of my big power moves on making sure I don't burn out, and it also protects what I grow this for the year. So if you're brand new to growing food, I suggest you find plants or vegetables, fruit that you actually enjoy eating. Because like I said, the seed catalogs are coming out. They're going to market or push hard all the varieties that are new for this year. So all the brand new hybrids. And I don't fault them for that, but that's how they run their business. My 90-10 rule is 90% of what I grow this year is what we love to eat. So we eat a lot of broccoli, a lot of leafy greens. Our family loves cucumbers, so I grow 3 different types of cucumbers. Slicing cucumbers, pickling cucumbers. We still have pickles in the refrigerator from this last year, and then lemon cucumbers. So 90% of what we grow for our own family here is what we love to eat, and then 10% every year is what I kind of experiment with. And I cap it at 10% because in years past, when I got too many new plants, too many new varieties here, I found out quickly that there might be some type of external issue with a virus, maybe a fungus or fungi that is in my local area. Um, so basically, what I'm saying is I had plant failures, and if I cap my garden at 10%, then I already know how the other 90% is going to perform. The new 10%, new variety of like a broccoli or something, or new hot pepper, because I love hot peppers. So every year I'm trying new varieties. I limit my exposure to failure on the plants that I've grown for the first time. I don't have a reference on how they're going to perform outside of what the seed packet has told me. And then I've also had years where the seed packet or the description for that seed variety talked about how delicious that tomato was, and then I find out after growing it that I never want to grow this again because it tastes like water. It's just not a lot of flavor in it. So 90-10, 90% of what you really, really love to eat, and then 10% of experimental. Maybe try a new variety of hot pepper or a new tomato, maybe a brand new plant that you've never grown before, like eggplant, or I don't know, nasturtiums if you want to do edible flowers. But that's how I do that. 90% what we love, and then 10% experiment with. And then I do the same thing with our CSA. So our CSA customers, every year I'm trying new varieties with them. This last year we did midget sweet corn. I have been looking for better part of a decade for a sweet corn variety that works in containers, and I did find that. I'll put in the notes for this live stream after we get done today. But there is a variety of sweet corn, a hybrid that will work in a container. I use a 10-gallon container for that, and so far I like the performance on that. So we're going to continue to grow that in the future, and that is through Burpees. That's where I got that variety. So yeah, what I have set up for the rest of this year is we're going to be doing live streams at 9 o'clock on Saturdays, and I'm gonna present these as the nursery fires up. So the live streams are going to be relevant to what I'm doing right now. So today, this weekend, I'm going to have all my seeds ordered for this year, and then next weekend we're going to start talking about how we set up the seeds for success. So I'll have information to share with you about our process, the seed starting mix we use, the conditions, because a lot of having a successful seed starting experience is making sure that the conditions are right for that seed. And I can't talk about that today, otherwise I'd go on for another 2 hours. But I'm not going to make it overwhelming. It's just different seeds have different requirements, and it's not super complicated. But we are going to talk about that because I want you, if you are starting from seeds this year, I want you to set yourself up for success. So I will minimize that with, we have warm season plants and cool season plants. And as long as we obey the physics of mimicking what those seeds have in real life, that's 90% of the setting up that plant for success, is mimicking real life for that. So tomatoes, peppers, warm season seeds, lettuce, and other leafy greens like kale, broccoli's in that too. We're going to mimic that. But next Saturday at 9 o'clock, I'm going to talk to you or walk you through. I'm also going to show you the equipment I use. And I'm going to keep that as simplified as possible too, but you'll see what we use here at the nursery. Anyway, I've talked enough. I really appreciate you joining me today, and I look forward to growing with you today. If you have any other questions that I did not answer today, please, you can go to my website or Makes Edible Landscapes and direct message me. I got my phone number on there too. You could text me, or you could drop it here in the video, and I'd love to follow up with you and answer any of the questions you have. Until next week, stay warm, and I look forward to growing with you guys this year. Take care.